David had dreamed for many years of living in a quiet place near the water. For most of his life, he worked in the city, surrounded by noise, traffic, and endless tall buildings. He often told himself, "One day, I will live in a home where I can hear the birds instead of car horns." That dream came true when he bought a small but beautiful house in a neighborhood by the lake. The house itself was not the biggest in the community, but to David it was perfect. The windows opened toward the calm water, and every morning he could see the reflection of the sky dancing on the lake's surface. His heart felt lighter there. He enjoyed drinking his morning tea while listening to the sound of the breeze passing through the trees. It was peaceful, almost like a reward after years of hard work. But David believed that a home was more than walls and a roof. To truly feel settled, he wanted a boundary around his space. He was not trying to keep people out, nor was he trying to show off. For him, building a simple wooden fence meant security, privacy, and the comfort of knowing where his land began and where it ended. It was about creating a safe little world for himself, a place he could truly call his own. The fence he built was not grand or fancy. It was plain, with wooden posts and neat lines, but he had put effort into making it strong and balanced. He measured carefully, painted the wood to protect it from the weather, and even planted flowers near it. When he looked at the fence, he did not see just wood, he saw a symbol of stability, a reminder that he had finally built a life he had always wanted. At first, David thought everyone in the community would understand. He even imagined neighbors might come over, smile, and say, "That's a nice fence. It really makes your place look warm and welcoming." But he quickly learned that life in the neighborhood was not as simple as he hoped. In the Lake Hoa community, there were rules for almost everything. Rules about what color you could paint your house, rules about how tall your grass could grow, even rules about where you could park your car. David respected rules. He believed order was important, but he also believed rules should be fair and reasonable. Before building his fence, he checked the property papers and local county guidelines. Everything he did was within his legal rights. That gave him peace of mind. Yet, there was one person in the community who saw things differently. Linda, the Hoa president, was known for being strict. Neighbors often whispered about how she liked to check every detail in the community, from the color of mailboxes to the shape of garden decorations. Some people called her watchful, while others quietly described her as controlling. David had not met her when he first moved in, but he soon would. One warm afternoon, while David was brushing fresh paint on the fence, he noticed a shadow on the ground. Turning around, he saw a woman standing at the edge of his yard. She was in her mid-50s, dressed neatly, and carried a folder in her hand. Her eyes were fixed on the fence, and she did not look pleased. "Good afternoon," David said kindly, setting his brush down. The woman gave a polite but firm nod. "I'm Linda. I'm the president of the Hoa." David smiled. "Oh, nice to meet you. I'm David. I just moved in last month." Linda glanced again at the fence, her lips pressed tightly together. "I need to talk to you about this. This fence, it doesn't follow the community standards. You'll need to remove it." For a moment, David was confused. "Remove it?" he asked gently. "I made sure everything was within my property line. I even checked with the county office." Linda shook her head, flipping through the folder she carried. "This community has its own guidelines. The fence doesn't match. We prefer open yards with a shared view of the lake. It creates a uniform look." David took a breath, trying to stay calm. He did not want to argue. "I understand, but I built this fence on my land. It's not blocking the view of the lake, and it's not harming anyone. It gives me a sense of home. Linda's voice hardened. The rules are rules. If you don't take it down, there will be consequences. David felt a knot in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. I respect rules, but I also respect my rights. I'm not breaking any law. I hope we can find understanding. Linda did not reply. She simply closed her folder, gave him a final sharp look, and walked away. As the sun set that evening, David sat by his fence and thought deeply. He had expected peace, but instead, he felt the storm of conflict beginning to rise. Yet, as he touched the smooth wooden post beside him, he reminded himself why he built it. This was not just a fence, it was his line of dignity, a part of the dream he had worked so hard to achieve. And David quietly promised himself, I will stand by what is right, no matter how hard this becomes. The next morning, David woke up with a calm heart. He made his usual cup of tea, stepped onto his porch, and looked at the lake shining in the soft golden light. For a moment, he forgot all about Linda and her words. He wanted to believe that maybe she had spoken in the heat of the moment and would simply let things go. After all, the fence was not harming anyone. But by afternoon, David learned that Linda was not the type to let things go. When he went out to check his mailbox, he found a letter inside an envelope with the HOA logo on it. He opened it carefully, and inside was a formal notice. The letter stated that his fence was a violation of the HOA guidelines and that he had 10 days to remove it. If he failed to do so, he would face daily fines. David stood there in silence, holding the paper. The tone of the letter was cold, almost as if it had been written without any thought for the person reading it. He felt a weight pressing down on him. He had only just begun his new life here, and already there was trouble. Still, David was not someone who gave up easily. He placed the letter on his table and decided to respond calmly. He pulled out his property documents, the county's approval records, and even the survey map of his land. After collecting everything, he wrote a letter back to the HOA, explaining that the fence was legally built within his boundary. He included copies of his documents as proof and placed it in the HOA office mailbox the next morning. For a few days, things were quiet. David continued with his routine. He watered his plants, enjoyed walks by the lake, and greeted neighbors with a smile. Some neighbors were friendly, waving back warmly. Others, however, looked at him with curious eyes, as though they had already heard something. It was during one of his walks that David overheard two women talking near the community garden. "That's the new man who built that fence," one whispered. "Yes, Linda says it ruins the look of the neighborhood," the other replied softly. David pretended not to notice, but inside, he felt a pang of sadness. He had moved here for peace, not to be judged by strangers. The following weekend, Linda appeared again. This time, she didn't come alone. She brought along another HOA member named Mark. Together, they walked up to David's yard while he was trimming his flowers. "David," Linda began firmly, "we've reviewed your letter. But this doesn't change the fact that the HOA has guidelines. The fence does not fit those guidelines." David wiped his hands on a cloth and stood tall. "I respect the HOA, but I also respect the law. This fence is on my property. I have proof, and I've shared it with you." Mark looked uneasy. Unlike Linda, he wasn't harsh. "David, maybe we can find a middle ground. Could you consider lowering the fence? Or maybe changing the design?" David shook his head gently. "This fence is simple and safe. I built it with care. I don't see why it should be taken down. Linda crossed her arms tightly. If you don't cooperate, you'll be fined. That's the rule. David looked into her eyes. There was no kindness there, only control. Then I'll handle it, he said calmly. I'm not removing the fence. Linda gave him a sharp look, then turned and walked away, Mark following behind her. That night, David sat at his desk, thinking about what had happened. He wasn't afraid of fines, but he was worried about the way things were going. He wanted to live in peace, but it seemed Linda was determined to make things difficult. As he thought, a knock came at his door. It was his neighbor, an elderly man named Tom. "Evening, David," Tom said with a kind smile. "I just wanted to say I think your fence looks fine. Don't let Linda get to you. She's been like this for years. Always trying to control everything." David felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, Tom. That means a lot." Tom nodded. "Stand your ground, son. You've done nothing wrong." After Tom left, David looked once more at his fence under the moonlight. It stood quietly, strong and steady, just like he wanted to be. He knew the battle was only beginning, but he also knew he wasn't completely alone. And deep in his heart, he promised himself again, this fence is not just wood. It is my right, my peace, my home. I will not let it fall so easily. The following week, David began to notice something unusual. Every morning, when he stepped outside to water his plants, he saw Linda walking slowly near his yard. Sometimes she carried her phone, other times a small notebook. She would pause, glance at the fence, and then scribble something down. At first, David tried to ignore it. He told himself, maybe she is just checking on all the houses. Maybe it's not only about me. But deep inside, he knew it was different. The way she stared at the fence, the way she frowned as if the wood itself had insulted her, it was clear that she was not letting this matter go. One evening, David was sitting in his living room reading when he heard voices outside. He looked through the window and saw Linda speaking with two neighbors on the street. Her hands moved sharply as she pointed toward his house. Though he could not hear every word, he caught enough: rules, violation, doesn't listen. David sighed. He had always believed that good neighbors respected each other. He had never thought he would be the subject of gossip in such a quiet place. The fence, which had once made him feel safe, was now the very thing making him feel like an outsider. The next day, he decided to take a step of his own. He drove to the county office again to meet the land surveyor. He showed them the HOA notice, Linda's complaint, and all his documents once more. The officer looked over everything carefully and then said, "Mr. David, your fence is within your boundary. It does not violate any county law. If the HOA disagrees, that's between them and their internal rules, but legally, you are correct." Those words gave David comfort. He walked out of the office with a sense of relief, but he also knew it would not stop Linda. She was not fighting for law or fairness, she was fighting for control. That evening, he prepared a small folder with every paper he had: property deed, survey maps, and the county's written confirmation. He wanted to be ready for whatever might come next. And soon enough, it did. 2 days later, David returned home from the grocery store and found a bright orange paper taped to his door. It was another HOA notice, but this time the wording was harsher. It claimed he was ignoring community standards and warned that fines would begin the following week. David read the paper carefully, then folded it and placed it in his folder. He did not panic. Instead, he decided to remain steady. He had the truth on his side. But the pressure was growing. At the community park, some neighbors stopped greeting him. A few looked at him with pity, as though he had brought trouble upon himself. Others seemed curious, waiting to see what would happen. One kind neighbor, a woman named Anna, approached him while he was sitting on a bench by the lake. "David," she said softly, "I just want you to know that not everyone agrees with Linda. Many of us think your fence is fine. But people are afraid to speak up. She has been president for a long time, and nobody wants conflict with her." David gave her a grateful smile. "Thank you, Anna. Your words mean a lot. I don't want conflict either. I only want peace in my home." Anna nodded. "Peace is sometimes worth standing for. Don't lose hope." Encouraged by her kindness, David returned home feeling a little stronger. But his peace would not last long. Late one afternoon, as the sun was setting, David stepped outside and froze. Linda was standing inside his yard near the fence. She had a tape measure in her hand, stretching it across one of the posts. David walked quickly toward her. "Linda," he said firmly but politely, "you cannot be on my property without permission." She looked up, not at all embarrassed. "I have every right to check this. The fence is not acceptable." David shook his head. "No. You are trespassing. I've already confirmed with the county. The fence is on my land, and you have no authority to step in here." For a moment, Linda's eyes flashed with anger. Then she muttered, "We'll see about that," and marched out of his yard. David stood there, his heart beating fast. That moment was different from all the letters and warnings before. This was no longer just about fines or notices. This was about someone crossing his personal boundary. That night, David sat by his fence, the moonlight shining on the wooden posts. He felt both determined and tired. He wanted to believe that truth and patience would win, but now he knew this battle would not be simple. Linda was not going to stop. As he leaned against the fence, he whispered to himself, "This is more than wood. This is about respect. And I cannot give that away." The quiet night around him seemed to agree, the sound of the lake carrying his silent promise into the dark. For a few days after catching Linda trespassing in his yard, David thought she might finally stop. He hoped that his calm but firm words had made her realize she had gone too far. He carried on with his daily routine, watering his flowers, enjoying tea on the porch, and taking quiet walks by the lake. But deep down, he knew it was only a matter of time before Linda tried again. That time came sooner than he expected. It was a warm afternoon, and David was in his backyard planting new flowers along the base of the fence. The sun was shining gently through the trees, and birds hopped around the grass, picking at seeds. For a moment, life felt peaceful. Then, in the distance, he heard the faint sound of sirens. At first, he thought it must be something happening in town, but the sound grew louder, closer until he realized it was coming straight toward his street. 2 police cars pulled up in front of his house. David stood frozen, his gardening tools still in his hands. A moment later, Linda appeared on the sidewalk, her arms crossed, her expression one of satisfaction. The officers stepped out of their cars and approached David. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" one of them asked politely. "Yes, officer," David replied, his voice steady though his heart was beating fast. "We received a complaint," the officer continued, glancing at Linda. "The report says you built a fence on property that doesn't belong to you. We need to take a look." David took a deep breath. He had been preparing for this moment. Without hesitation, he wiped his hands, went inside, and returned with his folder of documents. He handed it to the officer. "Everything you need is here," David said calmly. "This is my property deed, the survey map, and written confirmation from the county that the fence is within my boundary." The officers studied the documents carefully. They walked around the yard, checking the fence, comparing it with the maps. After a few minutes, one of them nodded. "Sir, you are correct. This fence is fully on your land. You have every right to keep it." David felt relief spread through him. But before he could say anything, Linda stepped forward. "That can't be right," she exclaimed, pointing at the fence. "It doesn't follow HOA rules. It ruins the look of the neighborhood. He has to take it down." The officer turned toward her, his tone professional but firm. "Ma'am, HOA rules are not the same as county law. This gentleman is not breaking any law. Our job is to enforce the law, and in this case, he has done nothing wrong." Linda's face turned red. Her lips pressed tightly together as if she wanted to argue more, but the officers were clear. They handed David back his documents and said, "Sir, you're fine here. Thank you for cooperating." Then they turned to Linda. "Ma'am, please understand that calling us for matters like this takes our time away from real emergencies. Be careful about making false reports." With that, the officers returned to their cars and drove away. The sound of the engines faded into the distance, leaving silence behind. David stood by his fence, his hands still holding the folder. He felt both relief and sadness. He had won this moment, but the fact that Linda had called the police over something so small made him realize how far she was willing to go. Linda, meanwhile, stormed off down the street without another word. Her footsteps were sharp against the pavement, her frustration clear for everyone nearby to see. A few neighbors had come out of their homes during the commotion. Some stood quietly at their gates, watching. One man gave David a small nod of support, and another whispered to his wife, "Poor guy." All this over a fence. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake with golden light, David sat on his porch reflecting on the day. He replayed the scene in his mind: the flashing lights, the police officers, Linda's anger. For a moment, he felt exhausted. All he had wanted was peace, but instead he was living inside a storm he had never asked for. Still, he reminded himself of one truth: he had done nothing wrong. The law was on his side. And though Linda had tried to shake him, he was still standing, still calm, still determined. As night fell, he walked to the fence and touched one of the posts, feeling the smooth wood under his fingers. "You're still here," he whispered softly. "And so am I." The quiet sound of crickets filled the air, and the lake reflected the stars above. In that calmness, David found strength again. He knew the battle wasn't over, but he also knew something important: he was ready for whatever came next. After the day the police visited, David thought maybe Linda would slow down. The officers had made it clear that he was within his rights. Surely, she would realize it was useless to keep fighting. For a short while, it seemed that way. The street was quiet, the evenings calm, and David allowed himself to breathe a little easier. But Linda was not done. A week later, on a cool morning, David stepped outside with his cup of tea. He walked slowly along the fence, admiring the flowers he had planted at its base. The dew sparkled on the petals, and for a moment, the world felt gentle. But then, his eyes caught something strange. The latch on his backyard gate was open. He was sure he had closed it the night before. He checked carefully. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. Still, the open gate left him uneasy. He told himself it could have been the wind, or maybe he had forgotten to secure it. But in his heart, he wasn't convinced. That evening, his doubt became truth. As he watered his plants near the fence, David saw Linda again. She was walking slowly down the sidewalk, holding her phone as usual. But this time, instead of stopping at the edge of the yard, she stepped directly into his property. Calmly, she walked along the fence, pointing her phone at each post, taking pictures. David put down the watering can and walked toward her. "Linda," he said firmly, "you cannot come inside my yard without permission." Linda didn't even pause. She continued clicking photos. "I'm documenting this," she said. "This fence is against HOA standards, and I have every right to collect evidence." David's voice was calm but stronger now. "No, you don't. You are trespassing. I've already told you before, this fence is legal. The county confirmed it. You have no right to be here." Finally, she lowered her phone and looked at him. Her face was hard, her tone sharp. "You may think you can win with papers and county rules, but this community has its own standards. As HOA president, I have authority here. If you won't follow the rules, I'll make sure you face the consequences." With that, she turned and walked out of his yard. David stood there in silence, his heart heavy. This was no longer just a disagreement about wood and property lines. This was personal. Linda wasn't only trying to remove the fence, she was trying to control him, to push him into submission. That night, David sat at his desk with the folder of documents in front of him. He added a new set of papers, photographs of Linda inside his yard, captured from his small security camera by the porch. He saved them carefully, his mind clear. He didn't want to fight, but if she was crossing the line, he needed to protect himself. The next morning, when David walked outside, his neighbor Tom waved at him from across the street. "I saw her in your yard yesterday," Tom said. "She really crossed the line this time. If you need a witness, I'll stand for you." David felt gratitude warm his heart. "Thank you, Tom. That means a lot." Slowly, more neighbors began to notice Linda's behavior. Some whispered quietly when she passed by. Others avoided her, tired of her constant battles. A few even came to David, quietly offering their support. But Linda herself didn't change. 2 days later, David returned home from the store and found her again near his fence, measuring one of the posts with a tape measure. This time, David's patience broke. He walked quickly toward her. "Linda," he said, his voice steady but firm, "leave my property. Right now." She turned, unshaken. "I told you, I have authority." "No," David said, holding her gaze. "You don't. This is my land. I've respected you, I've respected the HOA, but this stops today. If you step into my yard again without permission, I will take legal action." For the first time, Linda hesitated. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing, then slowly gathered her tape measure and walked away without a word. David stood there, his heart racing. He didn't enjoy conflict, but he knew he had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. It wasn't just about wood, or flowers, or the look of the neighborhood. It was about respect and boundaries, things every human deserved. That night, as he watched the sunset over the lake, David felt a new strength inside him. He had not chosen this battle, but it had come to his door. And now, he knew what he had to do. He would no longer wait for peace to return on its own. He would protect it. The fence, standing strong against the fading light, seemed to whisper the same promise: hold your ground. The morning after Linda entered his yard with the tape measure, David woke up feeling different. For weeks, he had tried to stay calm, patient, and respectful. He had hoped that reason and kindness would make things better. But now, he realized something important: if he stayed silent, Linda would keep pushing. She would keep crossing the line. It was time to act. David began by organizing all the evidence he had carefully saved. On his dining table, he spread out every document: his property deed, the official survey map, and the county letter that confirmed the fence was legal. Beside them, he placed the HOA warning letters, the orange violation notice, and most importantly, the photographs from his security camera that showed Linda walking inside his yard without permission. Each piece told the same story. David was following the law. Linda was not. He took a deep breath and called a lawyer whose office was in town. The lawyer, a calm and thoughtful man named Mr. Harris, listened carefully as David explained everything. From what you've told me, Mr. Harris said, you've done everything right. The fence is legal. The county is on your side. And now, with photos of her entering your property without permission, you have a strong case for trespass. If you want to proceed, we can file a complaint in court. David hesitated for a moment. He had never imagined himself in a courtroom. He wanted peace, not battles. But then he remembered the sight of Linda standing in his yard, measuring his fence as if she owned it. That memory gave him clarity. Yes, he said softly but firmly. Let's do it. Over the next few days, David worked closely with Mr. Harris. They prepared the case carefully, attaching every photo, every letter, every legal paper. David was nervous, but the lawyer assured him, truth is on your side. Stay calm, stay respectful. The court will see what's right. When the lawsuit was officially filed, news spread quickly in the neighborhood. For years, Linda had been known as the strict HOA president who always won her battles. But now, the story was different. Neighbors whispered, David is taking her to court. Some were surprised, some quietly pleased, and others relieved, as if someone was finally standing up to the control they had lived under for so long. The day of the hearing arrived. David dressed neatly, carrying his folder of documents. As he walked into the courthouse, his heart pounded, but his steps were steady. Inside, Linda was already there, sitting with her arms folded, her expression firm and unyielding. The judge began by listening to Linda's side. She spoke about community rules, uniform standards, and how the fence did not fit the look of the neighborhood. She repeated the same words David had heard many times before. Then it was David's turn. He stood, his voice calm but clear. Your Honor, I respect community rules. But I also respect the law. This fence is within my property. I confirmed it with the county. I followed every legal step. The issue is not the fence, it is the fact that Mrs. Linda has entered my property without my permission, multiple times, despite my warnings. I have photographs, notices, and even a police report that proves this. He handed the folder to the judge. The courtroom was quiet as the judge flipped through the documents and studied the photographs showing Linda inside his yard with her tape measure. After a long pause, the judge looked at Linda. Mrs. Linda, the court finds that the fence is legal and within Mr. David's property boundary. Hoa rules do not override county law. Furthermore, you have trespassed on his property, which is unacceptable. You are hereby ordered to stay off his property. In addition, damages will be paid to Mr. David for the distress caused. The words filled David's heart with relief. He had stood his ground, and the truth had been recognized. Linda's face turned pale. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but the judge had already moved on to the next case. The matter was closed. As David left the courtroom, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The fight had been long, stressful, and heavy on his heart, but now, justice was on his side. He had not wanted conflict, but when it came, he had faced it with dignity. Back at home, his neighbor Tom waved at him with a big smile. "I heard the news, David. Good for you. You did the right thing." Other neighbors soon approached him too, some quietly thanking him for standing up, others offering warm smiles of support. Even those who had stayed silent before now looked at him with respect. That evening, David sat on his porch, watching the lake shine under the setting sun. The fence stood tall beside him, no longer a source of trouble but a symbol of strength. He touched the wood gently and whispered, "We made it." For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, he felt truly at peace. The weeks following the court case were quiet, almost peaceful, in a way David had longed for since he moved into the neighborhood. Linda no longer appeared near his yard. She avoided him, walking past quickly with her head down, and the tension that had once hung over his property slowly began to lift. David felt lighter. Every morning, he stepped onto his porch and looked at the lake, the water calm and sparkling, and the wooden fence standing proudly beside him. It was more than wood and nails now, it was a symbol of endurance, of standing firm for what was right. Neighbors began to act differently around him. Some came by to say hello, others stopped for short conversations about the lake or the flowers in his garden. There was a new warmth in their eyes, a subtle acknowledgement of the strength he had shown. Even those who had whispered gossip before seemed to approach him with respect. One sunny afternoon, Anna, the kind neighbor who had encouraged him during the early days of the conflict, knocked on his door. She smiled warmly. "David, I just wanted to say I'm glad it's over. You stood your ground without anger, and that matters more than you know." David returned her smile. "Thank you, Anna. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I just wanted to live in peace." Anna nodded. "You've inspired others too. People in this neighborhood are starting to speak up more. They've realized that fairness and courage matter, even in small communities." David felt a quiet pride in that moment. He had not wanted to fight, yet his determination had created a small change in the neighborhood. Respect had begun to replace fear, and truth had replaced rumors. That evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange over the lake, David walked along the edge of his yard, running his fingers over the smooth wooden posts of his fence. Each post reminded him of the difficult days, the stress, and the frustration he had endured. But it also reminded him of something stronger, his courage, his patience, and his commitment to his own rights. He remembered the first day he had built the fence, how proud he had felt to create a boundary for his home. Now, after weeks of conflict, the fence had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just a mark of property, it was a marker of integrity, a sign that he had stood firm without compromising his principles. Neighbors began to approach him more often, asking small questions about gardening or the lake, and David realized that relationships were slowly repairing themselves. Even people who had been skeptical or fearful of speaking their minds before now seemed more relaxed, as if a sense of fairness had returned to the community. One morning, David was planting new flowers along the fence when a young couple from down the street approached him. "We just moved in," they said shyly. "We love your fence. It's simple, but it gives your home a warm feel. We wanted to say hello." David smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot. Welcome to the neighborhood." As they talked briefly about gardening tips and neighborhood life, David realized how much the atmosphere had changed. What had once been a place of tension and whispers had begun to feel like a true community, one where neighbors could respect each other's space and still live harmoniously. That night, David sat on the porch, a cup of tea in his hand, and watched the moon's reflection ripple on the lake. The world was quiet, the stars twinkling above, and the fence stood silently beside him, unshaken. He felt a deep sense of calm that he hadn't experienced in months. He thought about Linda, too. Her attempts to control him had failed, and perhaps that was for the best. David didn't feel anger toward her anymore, only relief and a quiet understanding. Sometimes, people try to force their will on others, but the truth has a way of coming through. As the night deepened, David whispered to himself, "This is my home. My peace. And I will protect it, no matter what." The lake reflected the moonlight like a mirror, the fence cast gentle shadows on the grass, and for the first time in a long time, David felt completely at home. Not because the struggle was over, but because he had stood up for himself, acted with honesty, and held his ground. In the quiet, he realized something important: peace isn't given. It's earned through patience, courage, and respect for yourself and for others. The fence had been the beginning, but his actions had created the true peace he had always sought. And with the calm night around him, the gentle sound of the lake, and the fence standing strong, David knew that this home, this little piece of the world, would always be a place of safety, dignity, and hope. For the first time in months, he smiled fully, letting the tension of the past weeks drift away. Life could bring challenges, he thought, but as long as he stayed true to himself, there would always be light at the end of every storm. He took one last look at the fence, the lake, and the stars above, feeling gratitude fill his heart. The fence had not only protected his property, it had protected his peace, his home, and his spirit. And in that quiet, beautiful moment, David felt completely free.